Now that pit that you saw in the first couple of slides is going to be 750 feet deep, which is deeper than the tallest building in the state of Wisconsin, which is the First National Bank building in Milwaukee. And I have an editorial which refers to those dimensions in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, which means that in order to excavate the pit, you're going to have to de-water all of the aquifer that is right now part of the area that will be the eventual open pit. As you de-water that area, you're going to lower the groundwater. You're going to create what is known as a cone of depression around the mine site, which means that all the water from the surrounding area is going to be discharged into the pit, and they have to pump out that water, and that will eventually result in a lowering of the groundwater around the mine site. So that would mean that the Shaky Lake Savanna, 1,500-acre natural area, part of the Escanaba State Forest, would be significantly impacted both from the water drawdown as well as the surface excavation so near the mine site. And here's an opposition stop sulfide mining next to the entrance to Shaky Lakes Park. Now, the reason why I emphasize this is a sulfide mine is because we know that the chemical reaction of sulfide materials with air and water produces acid mine drainage, which is the great unsolved problem of the modern mining industry. We know that metallic sulfide mines in the United States will pollute up to 27 billion gallons of fresh water per year because of all the waste that contains the sulfide mineralization. And the main reason is that acid drainage occurs when mineral deposits containing sulfides are exposed to air and water during excavation. And here's the end result of the sulfide mining. You have contaminated surface water and groundwater that has this characteristic reddish-orange color, which indicates acid mine drainage. Whenever you see this kind of acid drainage, what you have is a biological dead zone. There's no aquatic life, there's no fish life, there's no plant life. It is essentially a biological sacrifice area because that area will never support any kind of organic life with all the acids that are released during mining. And the kinds of metals that are released include arsenic, lead, and mercury into surface and groundwaters, threatening local water supplies and human health, because eventually the mercury, the lead, and the arsenic are going to become part of the food chain. They're going to be incorporated in the fish, and the fish that are harvested from those areas will be labeled as hazardous waste, essentially, because of all the mercury and other contaminants in those waters. And this is something that is not a temporary problem. This is a permanent problem. The production of acid drainage is a perpetual pollution problem because the pollution doesn't stop until all the waste material has been exhausted. So we have mines in the western United States going back 100 years that have been closed for 50 years that are still producing acid mine drainage. We have mines going back to the Roman times, 2,000 years ago, that are still generating acid drainage after 2,000 years. So this stuff is permanent, like nuclear waste. As I said, the vast majority of the rock coming out of the open pit will end up as either tailings, which is the waste material after the copper and the zinc and the gold have been separated from the waste rock, or as overburden, which is the rock that they have to remove before they get to the valuable gold and the zinc deposits. In any case, whether we're talking about the overburden or we're talking about the tailings, both combined have the potential to create acid mine drainage. And as I said, the vast majority of that rock ends up as waste, which is piled hundreds of feet high in the mine, the mine footprint area, which is the area around the open pit and the mine wastewater treatment plant. Now, this is a diagram of a oil sands tailings area, but whether we're talking about oil sands or any other kind of mining, the same basic process exists, which is that once the valuable tar sands or the copper and the zinc is excavated, you have this fine sandy material having the consistency of talcum powder that is piled hundreds of feet high on the site, available to be dispersed in the air and the wind and the rain and the snow and other serious extreme weather events like extreme rainfall or extreme or hurricanes or tornadoes, which are increasingly the norm for the new era of climate change that we are in as a result of global warming. And the other thing to note about this diagram is that these dike walls are made of the waste rock material, the fine-grained waste rock material. They're not, these permanent barriers that separate the waste rock from the rest of the environment. They're simply, essentially, mounds of waste that have come out of the mine processing and piled up next to the mine in these piles, hundreds of feet high and miles long. 54 million tons of waste rock will be coming out of this mine. The prognosis for these tailings areas is not very encouraging, because what we have is a series of major tailings disasters in the last 15, 20 years of supposedly modern state-of-the-art waste management engineering for these mine projects. One of the most serious that occurred in Europe occurred in January 2000, a spill of 100 tons of cyanide-contaminated water at the gold processing plant on the Romanian-Hungarian border. And by the way, part of the excavation process for the Back 40 mine involves the use of cyanide to separate the gold from the waste rock. So in the tailings and in the waste rock, you're going to have, or in the tailings actually, you're going to have cyanide residues that potentially can be leached into the environment or released catastrophically if there's some kind of breach of the tailings impoundment. This is exactly what occurred in January 2000 and resulted in 1,400 tons of fish dying as a result of the accident, also destroying the livelihood of hundreds of fishermen along the Tisza River in Hungary. And some of those Romanian and Hungarian towns, the drinking water supply had to be shut down for days, and the record of tailing spills containing cyanide in the United States is no better than in Europe. 51 spills and dam breaches over a decade have occurred in the United States. In 1998, Montana voters banned the use of cyanide. The Czech Republic banned the use of cyanide in the year 2000. The most recent study of tailings dam failures indicate that mine waste failures are increasing in frequency, severity, and cost all around the world. Nearly half of all recorded serious failures happened in modern times between 1990 and 2010. So the company will continually reassure people that we have learned the lessons of the past, that we have this new environmentally conscious engineering mining technology which will prevent these kind of disasters from occurring. That is not supported by the record. The record suggests that the most state-of-the-art tailings dam facilities are precisely the ones that are failing and releasing large amounts of waste material into the environment with catastrophic environmental and human health consequences. And of course, the higher and the more extensive the tailings, and of course, in this particular situation, we have a mine that is 3 times the size of the Flambeau mine in Wisconsin, which was the open pit mine next to the Flambeau River. And we have, in the case of the Back 40 project, extensive tailings that will be stored on site, compared to the Flambeau mine, where there were no tailings stored on site, but there was still contamination nonetheless. And some of these tailings areas are as high as the Washington Monument, 550 feet high, or the Hoover Dam, 720 feet high. A more recent example of a major catastrophic tailings dam failure, which occurred in Canada, in British Columbia, occurred in 2014 more than 1 billion gallons of mine waste spilled into rivers from the tailings dam at Imperial Metals, Mount Pulley gold and copper mine at the headwaters of the Fraser River in British Columbia. This is the largest single disaster in Canadian history, and of course, that is significant because Canada is one of the leading mining countries in the world. They have the most experience with mining technology, and for this to happen in a country which prides itself on being a leader in mining, the mining industry, is an indication that the state of the art is nothing to be reassured about as far as the stability of these waste materials. And this gray matter that you see is all, well, first of all, here is the breach. This gap where the tailings dam broke and released all of the material in the back of the tailings dam into the Fraser River, and the primarily affected communities along the Fraser River were indigenous communities whose livelihood depended upon fishing and other, well, for their drinking water as well as their fishing activity. As I said, Aquila Resources, the main company promoting this mine, has consistently referred to the Kennecott Flambeau mine as an example of a safe, environmentally responsible mining operation. And here's the quote from John Cherry, who is the former project manager for the Eagle project in Marquette County. Over the border in Wisconsin, Kennecott operated the 180-acre Flambeau copper mine right next to the Flambeau River for 5 years without a single environmental incident. That mine has now been closed for 10 years without any further incident, and we've just received a certificate of completion, which means that we fulfilled all our obligations and have been refunded 80% of our bond, the largest amount allowed. The certificate of completion was not for the entire mining area. It was only for part of the mining area. It did not include the rail line or the rail corridor where they unloaded the unprocessed ore into ore cars going to Canada, because that is the area where there is ongoing contamination of copper and zinc that has been discharged into the Flambeau River. And so when they talk about certificate of completion, they fail to point out that it doesn't cover the entire mine site. And the part that it doesn't cover is the part that is still contaminating the Flambeau River. So here's the headline from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel: tests find toxins at model mine. And here is the edge of the pit at the Flambeau mine next to the Flambeau River, very similar to what the back 40 is going to look like if they get a permit to go ahead at the back 40 site next to the Menominee River. The open pit copper mine at Flambeau operated from 1993 to 1997. 14 years after mining operations ended, water samples on the site of the Flambeau mine near Ladysmith show high levels of toxic pollutants. So there are two sources of pollutants. One is the backfilled pit is now exhibiting levels of contamination inside the pit as groundwater flows through the excavated pit, which is now filled in with waste material, and the levels of contamination are way in excess of health standards by the state of Wisconsin. In January 2012, U.S. District Judge Barbara Crabb ruled the Flambeau Mining Company had violated the Clean Water Act on numerous counts by discharging toxic pollutants into a tributary of the Flambeau River on a repeated basis over the years. And here is one of the opponents of the Flambeau mine, the late Roscoe Churchill, with a sign next to the reclaimed Flambeau mine: just grass over a grave. So if you go to the Flambeau mine, they'll give you a tour of the site and show you all the replanted vegetation and the trees. What they will not show you is the contamination underneath the soil in the abandoned pit and in the Flambeau River. Flambeau Mining Company's violation of the Clean Water Act was overturned by the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in August 2013 on a technicality. The Court of Appeals did not clear the company of violating environmental standards. The ruling was based on a technicality that allowed the errors made by Wisconsin DNR in its administration of the Clean Water Act to shield the company from prosecution. Essentially, the court ruled that because the DNR had granted the company a permit that wasn't appropriate for the mine, they could not be held liable for the pollution. So the court never said there wasn't any pollution. All the court said was the company could not be held liable for the pollution. In 2014, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency listed Stream C, which is the area where the copper and the zinc were discharging toxic levels of metals into the Flambeau River, as impaired waters due to copper and zinc toxicity linked to the Flambeau mine operation. Stream C was the issue in the Clean Water Act lawsuit. So, 2 years after the court absolved the company of any responsibility, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency declared that nonetheless, this is an officially impaired water because of copper and zinc toxicity. Now, that's the surface water. That's the discharge from Stream C into the Flambeau River. That's the surface water. This shows you the levels of toxic metals in the actual pit, in the backfilled pit. 7 of the 8 monitoring wells within the backfilled pit are highly contaminated with manganese, as documented on the company's own reports. One well had manganese levels at 41,000 parts per billion. We know that levels of 14,000 parts per billion can cause the kind of nerve damage seen in Parkinson's disease. So the company has these monitoring wells in the backfilled pit. They monitor the levels of toxic metals, and several of these monitoring wells are showing levels of manganese that are thousands of times in excess of the maximum permissible levels listed by the Environmental Protection Agency. So the mining industry was not able to come up with a clean, safe, environmentally responsible mine at Flambeau, despite the small size of the mine compared to the Back 40 mine. The Flambeau mine is 1/3 the size of the proposed Back 40 mine. They didn't have tailings to worry about at the Flambeau mine because the ore was so rich that they shipped the unprocessed ore directly to Canada, so the tailings ended up in Canada, not in Wisconsin. Despite the fact there were no tailings at the mine, they still had mining pollution. So if there was a possibility of doing it right, that was the model mine where that should have happened. It didn't happen. And if they can't do it at Flambeau, they're certainly not going to do it at Back 40, where there's going to be larger amounts of waste that will not be easily contained, especially given the topography, the hydrology, and all of the extreme weather events that we know are going to occur because of climate change. The extreme rainfall, extreme snowfall, all of which destabilize the foundations of these waste piles. In 1998, the Indian Environmental Alliance in Wisconsin lobbied for passage of the mining moratorium law, which prohibited the state from issuing a mining permit until the mining company could provide an example of where a metallic sulfide mine has not polluted surface groundwater during or after mining. This has become known as Wisconsin's Prove It First law. That's why Aquila is so interested in getting a permit in Michigan, because they think this will pave the way for overturning the mining moratorium law in Wisconsin so that they can go ahead with their Bend project and their Reef project in Marathon County and Taylor County. So we are continually told that this mine is inevitable. And in fact, this was exactly what happened in 2009 when Aquila president Tom Quigley told the Lake Township Board in Menominee County the company expects to receive permits from Michigan's DEQ in 2010 and begins construction at its controversial Back 40 project in 2011. It is now 2016, and they are no closer to getting a permit now than they were in 2011. This is part of the whole psychological warfare that mining companies routinely unleash upon local populations to convince the local population that there is no possibility of opposing or successfully defeating a mining project. And the proof of the pudding is in the fact that Aquila's main financial backer pulled out of the project in 2012. Hudbay Minerals, which was the company that did have the mining expertise and the financing, pulled out of the project in 2012. Which had a 51% ownership in the project, while Aquila had a 49% interest. Hudbay's withdrawal put the project on hold, And of course, Hudbay had other problems, including human rights lawsuits originating from human rights violations in Guatemala, where they had a nickel mining operation. They were accused of committing a gang rape in 2027, the murder of an outspoken mining critic in 2009, and the shooting that left a man paralyzed near the company's mine in El Estor. The Church of England and a large pension fund in Norway have divested from the company over human rights concerns. Now that the company has successfully convinced investors in a private equity fund in New York called Orion Mine Finance to advance the company some advanced funding to go through the permit process, Hudbay has now come back into the project as a minor partner with an 18% interest in the project. In November 2015, Aquila filed its mine permit with Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality, but there's still widespread local opposition to the project. Aquila does not have a social license to operate. The best evidence among many that we have about the failure to obtain a social license to operate is the resolution passed by the Menominee County Board, which is the county on the Wisconsin side of the Back 40 mine project, which unanimously opposed the project by a vote of 28-0. And a similar resolution that was introduced in Menominee County was squashed by the county board chairman because they are afraid that the same opposition that occurred in Menominee County will result in a negative evaluation of the project on the part of the Menominee County Board. And of course, the last thing that Aquila wants is to have to explain to its investors why there is no local support for the mine project, as evidenced by the county board's opposition in Menominee County and potentially in Menominee County. Not to mention the opposition of the Menominee tribe and the unresolved questions of the cultural resources at the site. Now, the point about social license to operate is that this is different from what the state does. Right? The state can go ahead and issue a mining permit, as they are quite likely to do this coming week regarding the permit, but that does not mean that it's going to be a mine, because what they have not taken into account is the widespread opposition in the local community, which means that there is not a social license to operate. A social license is not something the state can grant. It's something that can only come from the voluntary consent of people in the local community. And if the local community does not provide that voluntary consent, this is a risky project for the investors. Mining companies that fail to obtain the support of local communities are at greater risk of protests, blockades, media campaigns, or legal challenges of their mining permit, not to mention the fact that we have a situation right now of depressed metal prices, and that is another major risk factor for this project. So, I end there. If people have any questions, I'll be happy to. Yeah.
I get a quick question. I don't recall. What's the total extent of the mine footprint? Is it 800 and some acres? That with the tailings area and the processing area and.
It's between, the last I saw was a little over 500.
500 acres.
I mean, that's probably a conservative estimate because that comes from the company.
Right.
And there are inevitably, impacted areas that are not being officially recognized by the company. So you probably, it's more likely 800 acres. Ron, do you know what the...
Yeah, I'll get it out of the money. It's 600, but I think they just procured another 200 acres. So they basically have 800 acres.
Well, that may be where what I came up with when somebody told me it was about 800 acres.
I think the permit says 580.
Yeah.
So 600, but we know somebody that's selling some more land to them in the area. So eventually, I'm sure it's going to be over 800 if they do get their permit.
The fact that we don't know exactly what the actual mine footprint is not accidental, because the company in their application has only submitted an application for an open pit mine. But they're in their public statements to their investors, they're talking about doing an underground operation after the open pit, which means that they're going to have to have additional area to store all the waste if they go for an underground operation. So I would encourage people to take some information from the table here. I have a couple of newsletters in the Wisconsin Resources Protection Council and an editorial from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, which give you some more background on the mine project and the controversy.